The year is 1991. I want you to imagine an old school software company, the kind of place where nostalgia met technology. There's a hum of ancient servers and the clickety-clack of mechanical keyboards. There's someone in a corner playing Castlevania on an SNES. One of the walls is adorned with vintage video game posters and old programming languages, a testament to the company's storied past. Now, I want you to imagine the kind of person working at this software company. I want you to keep that image in your head for a second. My name is Thomas Roberg, and I'm a business analyst at BBD. Let's quickly go back to that image of that person in your head. I'm sure a lot of you pictured what I like to call what my grandma thinks a software engineer looks like. You know, your stereotypical, antisocial, nerdy kind of person. I like to use this story as an example for how we have often used to view the people in tech as being of a certain type of person, a certain personality type. The last thing I want to do is sit here and sound like my grandparents, telling you that all your software developers are these introverted, nerdy, coffee-addicted people, while your managers are these loud, intense, and extroverted people. In actuality, personality can manifest in any way, and it's important that we don't let personality define us to a specific role, and that we understand that many different personalities can play many different roles and functions. You can have someone who is as shy as they come, but then they really thrive when they talk in front of a client. You can have someone who can code an authentication server in the afternoon and then go out to a club in that evening and be a center of attention. It's important that we remember personality is rather a springboard and not a chain. You can definitely use it to your advantage in your respective career, but in no way should you let it chain to what you can and can't do. I'm sure you've probably figured out by now that this isn't going to be your typical tech-related talk. Trust me, as much as I would love to sit here and tell you about my secret interests like quantum computer cryptography or aggressive artificial intelligence, the truth is my passion rather lies with working with people and trying to encourage people to be the very best versions of themselves. I believe that as people in tech, it's becoming more and more important in the current software landscape to focus on those aspects that maybe aren't so technical. I mean, if you're someone who's worried about your job being taken by AI, now might be the perfect time to get those people skills up to scratch. So we define personality as the combination of characteristics or qualities that form an individual's distinctive character. Or if you're someone who maybe watches the social media a little bit too much, personality can be defined as a famous person. Sadly, for all of us here obsessed with keeping up with the Kardashians, this talk is going to be focused on that first definition. For those of you who are watching this talk who might not be in the software development bubble, I'm sure a lot of you probably still think that the software industry is still dominated by those personality types that I mentioned earlier. In actuality, the tech industry wasn't and still isn't defined by a single set of skills. Rather, the industry has always thrived on the diversity of its professionals, with each of them bringing their own unique strength and perspective. Whether you're an analytical problem solver, a creative thinker, or a meticulous organizer, there's a place for you in tech. It's important that we don't let these stereotypes or self-doubts hold us back from our career in this dynamic field. It's important that we not only embrace our individuality, but also recognize that the industry actually needs our unique contributions. As we continue and to address complex challenges, the demand for our diverse talents will only grow. It's a good thing if you're completely different to the person sitting next to you. That's what makes what you bring to the industry even cooler. However, the topic of this talk is, does your personality suit tech? And it would have been dishonest for me to have lied to you with a topic that catches your eye just to get you to watch this presentation and then not even try to answer that question. The truth is, only you can answer that question. I mean, if you're watching this talk, there's already a very high chance you work in the software development bubble, and if you're anything like most of the people I meet in this industry, you're probably thriving. I do, however, hope that this talk helps you answer that question for yourself, and then maybe give you some ideas of what you can work on and where your career is going. I believe it is worth mentioning that while a lot of the talks today you're going to listen to are very tech related and they focus on those impressive hard skills, the kind of skills you can add to your next side hustle involving crypto, This talk is instead going to focus on those soft skills and how you can grow in your own interpersonal capacity in your own unique way. It's important that you remember that personality is kind of an abstract idea, and thus you're going to need to interpret what I'm telling you today in your own unique way. So like I defined earlier, we define personality as made up by different elements that makes up an overall person's character. We find that by understanding these different elements of your personality, we can understand a little bit more about yourself. And this can help you grow in your own personal capacity in a way that's both rewarding to you and the people around you. I hope that this talk perhaps tries and help guides you for your potential roles and areas for growth that you succeed in within your personality. Much like a hiking trail, there's many different routes you can take to get to the summit, but hopefully this talk can act as almost like a signpost to help you on your way there. I want you to be able to decide your own route and answer the question that this talk poses to you of whether you belong in tech. And hopefully by the end of it, you not only feel like you definitely do belong in tech, but that maybe there's some new things you can work on, or maybe there's a new role you should try. Maybe you're an analyst who's only ever worked for themselves, and this talk actually helps show you that your personality actually has a gift for social work, and you decide you're going to join one of your local community initiatives, like the teaching of underprivileged students on the weekend. Or maybe you're a software engineer who's always been a little bit quiet, but you find you actually have a knack for being an executive. Maybe try to take the lead on the next big piece of software work in your team. For us to try and understand your potential areas for growth, we first need to determine your personality. And in order to determine your personality, we need to categorize you into a specific personality type. We find that by understanding your personality type, we can then evaluate the strengths, weaknesses, and career opportunities associated to that type. I'm sure a lot of us here think that we're these amazing and unique people with all these different personality types and traits, with different aspects of our character that make us unique. And while I believe this is true, most of the academic world has decided to clump us into one of 9 or 16 different personality types. There's numerous reasons for us all being so similar, but it's mainly due to how we evolved. We as humans only survived and evolved as well as we did because of our inner need for community and love. And thus we often ended up mimicking the traits of those around us. If our ancestors saw someone do something cool, chances are they said, "Hey, that's cool," and they mimicked that because they would be better viewed as being accepted into society. It's a similar kind of thing these days when it comes to personality. If we see a personality type be more accepted when we grow up or when we enter environment, we often try and copy those traits to get people to like us so we can fit in more. So now that we know a little bit more about personality type, how can we actually classify you into a personality type? And this is where personality tests come into play. And I promise this talk doesn't have an exam attached to it. Personality tests are created with the purpose of classifying the person taking the test into a certain personality type. Different personality tests look at defining different areas of your personality. By defining your personality type by using a personality test, you can then determine the traits associated to that personality type, which we then can use to define and potentially predict your different strengths and weaknesses. These personality tests are created with the intent of classifying you into a certain personality type within a specific framework. And that sounded very technical, but basically different frameworks are usually used to try and explain different elements of your character and behavior. In other words, the different things that make up your personality. And there are 2 tests that I want us to speak about together, and later in the talk, I want us to do the first one together. However, before we even get into the tests, I know a lot of us are going to be thinking this question of, "Thomas, why should I go and spend my valuable time doing these silly personality tests? What's the point for me?" And that's a great question, and let me quickly explain why I think you're going to find this useful. I found while doing my master's that by giving a person a particular personality type, they often find it to be surprisingly accurate. And often the personality type that they find attributed to themselves can actually help expose a part of their personality previously unknown. Like I said on a previous slide, I'm going to be talking about 2 different personality tests. And again, you might be thinking, why do we need 2 different tests? Surely my personality type is my personality type. And the answer is yes and no. As I mentioned earlier, Your personality is something that is influenced by those around you, your environment, and, well, time as you grow. You might have been an introvert 5 years ago, but after a number of your company's year start functions, you felt that you were just becoming more of an extrovert. This is obviously a silly example, but the point is, personality is something that can change and grow. But we'll get into how we can determine your personality in the future and where it's going to be later in this talk. The two tests I want to talk about are the MBTI and the Enneagram. The MBTI looks at determining your personality at this very moment while you're watching this talk, while the Enneagram looks at trying to define where your personality is going and where it could potentially be in the next 10 to 20 years. For me, the best and worst thing about doing these tests is that you go into the first one thinking, there's no ways this is going to be accurate. And then after you read your results, you actually find that they're really accurate, as they've been for many people who've done them previously. And it can sometimes be a little bit scary, honestly. So for the first test, the MBTI, is probably the most famous personality test in the world. It stands for the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator and is the most commonly used test around the world. And we use it to classify you into one of 16 different personality types. If you've ever used dating apps before, and you've seen what looks like those 4 random letters at the bottom of someone's profile in the tag section, that's basically what this guy aims to achieve. By using the MBTI, each personality is given a 4-letter description, with each letter being one of 2 on a bipolar scale. For example, for your MBTI personality type, your first letter will always be an E or an I, whether you're an introvert or whether you're an extrovert. For those of you watching who maybe have done an MBTI before, you might have found that your results differed from perhaps a couple of years ago when you did the test. And that's because something like the MBTI looks at taking a snapshot of your personality at that time. If you did the test a couple of years later, your personality type could have potentially changed. A great thing about the MBTI is that it actually gives us career path recommendations for your personality type. For example, mine said analyst, and considering where I am today, I would say that's quite accurate. Additionally, the MBTI gives us different aspects of our personality that we both excel at and what we potentially need to work on. For example, I got the personality type of debater, ENTP, which let me know that I'm both very knowledgeable and charismatic. I mean, duh, thank you test, a great ego boost there. However, it also said that my personality type can be very argumentative and insensitive, and that these are the areas of my personality that I potentially need to work on and be aware of. As we can see, this test can both help expose a party that you might not be aware of, but also can try and help you grow into being a better person. However, I've just said that the MBTI only takes a snapshot of our personality at that very moment. So how can we figure out where our personality is going to be, where we want to work towards? Do we do an MBTI every few months and see if our results change? And as much as this would probably work, you're going to find it to be extremely boring. And in the end, you're actually just going to end up choosing the answers of the personality type you want to be, rather than the type you actually are. And that's why I introduced the solution to this problem, the Enneagram. This very pretty diagram is not indicative of what it actually looks like. I just think it looks really cool. Here's the actual diagram of the Enneagram. And I know it looks a little social sciencey and like something that was drawn by Tom Cruise, but I promise it will make sense as I explain it. Unlike the MBTI, we can actually use the Enneagram to try and determine someone's future personality. Similarly to the MBTI, the Enneagram personality test aims to classify its user into one of 9 different personality types instead of the 16 that the MBTI uses. The Enneagram aims to classify you into how you prefer to deal with the world, namely through anger, fear, or image. As we can see from this diagram, each letter is rather assigned a number instead of a bunch of letters. And these numbers are then arranged in a way that illustrates the dynamics of the system. Around the circle, we can see each of the 9 different personality types of the Enneagram. An advantage of the Enneagram when compared to the MBTI is it not only shows the traits associated to your personality, but also what actually happens to you when you're stressed or relaxed. Each personality type is connected through an arrow. These arrows help show us what happens under stress. Under stress, a specific personality type will take on some of the connected personality types' negative characteristics to which the arrow is pointing. However, it also shows us what happens when we're relaxed. When our personality type is relaxed, we take on the positive characteristics of the type from which the arrow is pointing away. For example, When a type 8 is stressed, it will take on the negative characteristics of a type 5. But when a type 8 is relaxed, it will take on the positive characteristics of a type 2. This means that a usually confident and assertive type 8 actually becomes secretive and fearful when stressed, like a type 5. However, when they're relaxed, the type 8 actually becomes open-hearted and caring, like a type 2. Similarly to the MBTI, the Enneagram also gives us a bunch of different traits for each of the personality types. I do want to quickly touch upon a point about the Enneagram before we carry on. The creators of the Enneagram have said that it represents ancient wisdom concerning self-development, and as such, the Enneagram has been used as a tool to help development of the individual, and we've actually begun to use it as the cornerstone for executive leadership development. In other words, if you're someone who's really close to that managerial position, maybe do the Enneagram test and see where you can try work on and improve upon yourself and your managerial skills. Additionally, I keep saying that we're going to use the Enneagram to try and determine where our personality is going to and how we're going to improve upon ourselves. So how does it actually aim to achieve this? Well, firstly, the Enneagram is far more savage with how it calls you out on your personality when compared to the MBTI. For example, for a type 4, it says they experience a world in which idealized love is missing. I mean, ouch. The Enneagram will additionally call you out on any areas of your personality that your personality type struggles with. In all honesty, it can often feel like a parent-teacher conference when you read through your report. But we find that by understanding where all your flaws lie in your personality, you can then start the process to try and deal with and improve upon these flaws. Like it's often said, rather the devil you know than the devil you don't, except this time the devil is yourself. Weird. In order to improve upon ourselves, the Enneagram actually gives us different levels of development that each specific personality test and type should strive for, with 1 being the most optimal level of development and 9 being the worst. Most of us watching this test are probably around a type 4 or 5, but these levels get really hectic really fast. I mean, for a type 4, it says that their most optimal level of development are being profoundly creative, expressing the personal and the universal, possibly in a work of art. They're inspiring, self-renewing, and regenerating, able to transfer all their experiences into amazing works of art, self-creative. And I mean, that sounds amazing, right? Remember, this is the most optimal level for this type. On the other extreme, the lowest level is described as despairing. They feel hopeless and they become self-destructive, possibly abusing alcohol or drugs to escape. In the extreme, emotional breakdown or suicide is likely. Generally corresponds to the avoidant, depressive, and narcissistic personality disorders. And I mean, wow, that's a lot. It's unlikely that any of us here are going to reach any of those lower levels, but you can really see what I mean about the Enneagram being far more savage than the MBTI. I do want to mention that we need to talk about the use for these levels, as although they are hectic and intense, we do use them as a way to benchmark ourselves and to try and understand where we are and where we should work on our personality in order to improve ourselves to get to the next level. So now that we know a little bit more about the MBTI and the Enneagram, we can now properly evaluate and interpret our personality, both where we currently are and where we want to go. This can be extremely valuable for us when we try and understand where we potentially want to steer ourselves, both in terms of our career and in our day-to-day lives. So, are you ready to try and find out where your potential strengths and weaknesses lie? In order for us to understand where you both excel at and where you need to work on, I want us to determine your MBTI personality type together. In other words, I want to try and potentially figure out your personality type without you having to take the actual test. Sadly, unlike the MBTI, we can't really do the Enneagram test on the fly as it's a little bit more complicated, so we'll have to ask you to go and do it later to try and figure out what Enneagram personality type you are. Just search the word Enneagram and click on the link from a company called Truity. In order for us to try and find out your MBTI personality type, we need to determine which 4-letter personality type you are. To figure this out, there are 4 bipolar scales which then correspond to the 16 different personality types that I keep speaking about. A bipolar scale is basically a seesaw where you need to decide which side you're leaning more towards. It's important here to note that although you need to place yourself on either side, most of us here are going to be just leaning a bit towards one more than the other. It's unlikely that someone's going to be 90% extroverted and 10% introverted. Most of us are going to be around the 60-40. Disclaimer: your personality test results would be far more accurate if you did the actual test, but I wouldn't blame you if you didn't want to go do it. I mean, a cool tech conference and here I am asking you to do your test seems super rude. However, if you do want to do the actual test, Google 16 personalities and click the first link. So, are you ready to try and determine your personality type with me? Remember, you need to decide which side of the scale you fall on, and then remember the corresponding letter that I tell you. Our first scale is introversion versus extroversion. And this one is probably going to be obvious for most of us, but for those of you who might be unsure, it basically measures your preference for people-related activity versus inner idea-related activity. In other words, does an office day away from home with your team excite you or cause you dread? And hopefully the answer to that is more a reflection on you than is your team. If you chose extroversion, give yourself an E, and if you chose introversion, give yourself an I. And there we go, that's the first letter of your personality. Our next scale is our sensing versus intuition scale. And I know it sounds very deep and intense, but it basically measures your preference for the practical and observable versus the abstract and theoretical. This one might be a little bit more complicated for you to decide which side you fall on, but it pretty much boils down to which information source you trust more. Are you someone who makes your decisions based on sensory data, such as things you can touch, feel, or see? Or are you someone who uses your gut or a vibe to make your decision? And that gives us our second letter. If you chose sensing, give yourself an S. And if you chose intuition, give yourself an N. Our third letter is a little bit more simple. This is our thinking versus feeling scale. And as you might have guessed, this scale aims to measure one's preference for logic rather than feeling. This scale aims to determine whether you're someone who's more focused on logic, such as patterns or facts, or if you're someone who's more likely to lean towards your emotions when you make a decision. That gives us our third letter, 1 to go. If you chose thinking, give yourself a T, and if you chose feeling, give yourself an F. The letter, not the score. I promise you're doing great. Lastly, we have the judgment versus perception scale. And this one is also a little bit more complicated to decide, but we want to try and determine your preference for rules and order versus your preference for flexibility. Are you someone who prefers a more planned, structured, and inflexible environment? The kind of person who are task-orientated, you love a to-do list, and you have a work before you can play attitude? Or are you someone who's more flexible and spontaneous? The kind of person who doesn't really like making plans, and you often mix work and play together. If you chose the rigid and structured type, give yourself a J, and if you chose the casual, relaxed, and perceiving type, give yourself a P. And just like that, you have your MBTI personality type. By combining all 4 letters from all 4 scales, you are officially grouped into one of the 16 different personality types. A quick note before I speak about the different personality types, like I said earlier, a test would be more accurate, so if a type doesn't exactly seem to be your cup of tea, rather go take the test again and see if it matches better to what you feel is you. For the next part of the talk, I do want to speak a little bit about each type. I'm going to give you your personality title, a strength and weakness associated with your personality type, and then the typical career path for your type. Each slide will have the associated personality lettering, and it's up to you to find your personality type based on that lettering. And once you find your personality type, see if you can try identify your bosses or your friends, and bonus points if you ask them about it later and you are right. So firstly, we have our 4 diplomats, and first in this group, we have the advocate. An advocate is a passionate person, and they often are drawn to becoming counselors, therapists, psychologists, but can also pursue careers in writing, music, and design. Your strengths are being insightful and passionate, but you can often struggle with being a perfectionist and being sensitive to criticism. Next, we have our mediators. Mediators want to feel that their work is helping others, and thus you choose careers such as counseling and healthcare. Your strengths are being empathetic and creative, but you struggle with being unfocused and unrealistic. Next is our protagonists, who often want to lead, and thus often pursue careers in management and sales. Your strengths are being reliable and charismatic, but you can often come across as intense and condescending. Last in this list, we have the campaigner, and these are enthusiastic and creative people and typically want to work in media or nonprofits. Your strengths are being curious and being great communicators, but you can often fall short with being disorganized or overly accommodating. Our next grouping is the sentinels, which contains the following 4 types of people. The logistician is someone who is practical and reliable, and they usually look at working at being data analysts, accountants, or doctors. As you might have guessed, your strengths are being honest and direct, but you can often come across as being stubborn and insensitive. Next is the defender, who are those warm and dedicated people in our lives. And these people typically go into careers that help people, such as therapy and social work. Your strengths are being reliable and supportive, but your weaknesses can be being reluctant to change and being overly humble. The executive, the personality type, not your boss, possesses the skills of being a great administrator and manager, and that's typically go into management roles. As you might have guessed, they succeed in being loyal, patient, and reliable, but they can often falter with being inflexible and stubborn. And finally, for this grouping, we have the consul, who are caring and social, who, funnily enough, actually end up working as accountants, or more often, media care and social work. You guys are sensitive and warm and have a strong sense of duty, but you can often be vulnerable to criticism and inflexible. Have you found yourself yet? If not, don't fret. Our next grouping is the analysts, and I feel like a lot of us are going to fall into this group. And we start with the architect. You guys are imaginative and strategic, often becoming business analysts or project managers. Your strengths are being rational and informed, but you can come across as arrogant and overly critical. Next is the logician. You guys, innovative and knowledgeable, and often become consultants. For your strengths, you are analytical and original, but you can also be disconnected and dissatisfied. The commander is a bold, strong-willed type, and often become business administrators, executives, lawyers, or professors. Part of your strengths are being efficient and energetic, but you can also fall short with being stubborn and dominant. Lastly in this grouping, we have the debater, and in my unbiased opinion, definitely the best one out of the bunch. This type is curious and challenging, and often falls into the career of entrepreneurship and engineering. Like I mentioned earlier, we can come across as charismatic, but we can also be insensitive and intolerant. Our final group is the explorers. And firstly, we have the virtuoso, who is a bold and practical type, often becoming data analysts, entrepreneurs, and forensic scientists. Your personality has the strength of being diligent and observant, but you can often be unapologetic and bored. Adventurers are flexible and charming, and love to work for themselves, thus often becoming artists and musicians. Because of your love for new things, you often are passionate and imaginative, but you can also struggle with structure. Entrepreneurs, the personality type, not the career, are smart and perceptive people. And as you might have guessed, this personality type typically goes into business and freelance. Because you want to start your own business, you are rational and practical, but your weaknesses are being impulsive and unstructured. And for our last personality type, we have the entertainer. This type is spontaneous and energetic. You guys typically go into counseling, social work, or design, and you are positive and enthusiastic, but you are also long, poor-term planners and unfocused. Phew, that was a lot. That's all 16 personality types within the MBTI, and hopefully you found it to be somewhat accurate. If not, again, like I said earlier, I would recommend going to do the actual test. Additionally, if your personality type isn't what you're currently doing in your career, it's important that we remember that the MBTI only gives us a snapshot of our personality and where we currently are. Much like our chameleon friend, we adapt to the changes of our environment, and these changes can affect our personality. So even if your personality type isn't suited to what you're currently doing, chances are in a couple years you would have grown and adapted to your environment and have a personality that's better suited to what you do within your role. In closing, I do hope that this talk has helped you perhaps understand a part of you that you didn't realize you had, or maybe given you a light bulb moment as to why you do something in your daily routine. I hope that you not only found it accurate, but by understanding your personality type and the traits associated to it, I hope you now understand a little bit more about your strengths and weaknesses, and that you're able to build on your strengths and work on your flaws, truly becoming the best version of yourself. I again want to reiterate the point I made at the start of this talk. You, the person watching this, you already work in tech. So it doesn't matter if your personality suits tech or not, or it isn't matching to what I've said today. Remember, personality is an abstract, ever-changing thing, and it's important to understand that you should never let it tell you to what you can and can't do. The tech industry would be far more limited if there was only several personality types working within the industry. It would be hypocritical for us to constantly encourage collaboration and then not have a diverse range of people working in the industry. Without all these different personality types, the software we create would either be far too analytical, not care enough about the users, try and make far too much money, be far too efficient, or just not look pretty enough. So look to your left and to your right, and be glad that the people sitting next to you are different to you. Opposites attract, but they also make far better software too. Thank you for your time.